Hello there, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and as always, I'm really excited to be here with you. In fact, this is another of the truly impromptu episodes here. I was literally sitting here watching a video about the Iran-Contra scandal, just brushing up on some history, I guess. And I have some time to kill because a couple of clients canceled today. I just had some free time open up, and I just was sitting here and said to myself, wait a second, I have enough time to do an episode. And here I am. And the episode I want to talk about today, and what I want to talk about in this episode, I should say, is blame. Okay, and really very specifically, I want to say that blame is BS. Okay, if I had one of those bleep, I would say the whole word and just bleep out the inappropriate part. But whenever things go wrong with us, right? When and this is a completely natural thing that happens, right? When things go not our way, when whether we come across some misfortune or things don't work out the way we want them to, or somebody literally does something to impact us in a negative way, right? The thing that we most often, or at least a good part of the time, what we do is we try to assign blame. Okay, now again, this is not something that is wrong necessarily, right? Because your brain and your nervous system are there really to do one specific thing, and that's to make sense out of the world and then to keep you alive. That's it, right? And so making sense out of the world includes finding out, how did we get to this point? Who is to blame for this problem that I'm experiencing? Who is to, what circumstances conspired to make this happen? Now, there is a healthy sort of approach to that, right? Because as we look at how we got into this situation, as we look at to how, I found myself here, right? That it helps me to look at how this happened so that I can understand it and perhaps make changes and perhaps make different decisions next time and avoid a negative experience again. Nothing wrong with that at all. However, there comes, like with many things in our lives and with matters of consciousness and emotions and psychology, there comes a point, a tipping point in a given process, like blame or like an inquiry into how did I get to this place. Which is to say, if we fixate on the blame, if we try to assign blame in order to release ourselves from some sort of responsibility, for instance, right? This is where, it goes from a healthy and harmless notion of, how can I figure out how I got here so I don't get here again, and it descends into something that is toxic for us. It descends into something that is going to create negative emotions and negative tension in our body. It's going to create stress, and this is also because in many ways, blame is never really true. Like there's also never really a specific and pure and clean, thing that we can put our finger on to say this is what happened, right? And even if we can say, okay, well, Joe did this that resulted in me feeling that, okay? Even if that's the case, and even if we're 100% correct about that, and there's no, objectively, it's very clear that that's true. When we do that, when we say Joe is at fault for this thing that I'm experiencing, it really takes away from a lot of the reality of what actually transpired in order for this to happen. Let me explain what I mean. Joe does something to create a negative situation for me. Okay, so Joe's the one to blame, right? But is Joe really to blame? Because Joe is operating under Joe's understanding. Joe is operating under the motivation of Joe's nervous system and his emotions and his preconceived understandings and his upbringing and his ancestry. His biology is responding to something in the here and now, or whenever the thing happened. But Joe is not necessarily in control of all of that. Right? Now, that's not to say that we're not responsible for our actions. We are. Okay. But just because we take responsibility for our actions doesn't mean that every action we take is of our control. Okay. Joe might be reacting to some childhood trauma, for instance. Joe might be reacting just simply to the way that he was programmed by his parents. And so then we say, okay, well, then Joe's parents are to blame, right? That was easy. Well, no. Because what about Joe's parents? How did they come up to the place that they are? How did they develop this nervous system response, this general emotional attitude towards the thing that we're talking about? Well, they picked it up from somewhere too. They picked it up through their experiences, and they picked it up through the experiences of the influence of their parents. So we say, okay, Joe's grandparents, right? But as you can see, it keeps going and going and going and going, to the point where we can recognize that there's no single thing that we can put our finger on to say, there it is, that's it. Now, in a lot of circumstances, it doesn't have to get this deep, of course, right? But the notion that I want to get to, or the idea that I'm trying to get to here, is that this notion of blame, right? Anytime that we try to blame someone else for a circumstance that we're experiencing, what we're doing is we're ignoring a very important truth. Okay, probably the most important truth as far as interpersonal experiences go. And that truth is that every one of us, every human being, comes into this world with a basic innate goodness. In the philosophy and practice of Buddhism, they refer to this innate basic goodness as one's inner nobility. This is where the term namaste comes from, which everybody's heard, right? It's cliche at this point. Namaste, translated, means that which is noble in me honors that which is noble in you. And so when I blame you for something, what I'm doing is I'm ignoring that which is noble in you. And I am assuming or I am deciding, if you will, that you are an ignoble person. You are someone who does not possess nobility and does not possess an inner goodness. And yes, this even applies to people who are criminal, right? Someone who steals from me. Right? They are stealing from me because of a need that they have. And the reason why they fill that need through stealing is because of the context in which they grew up. They grew up to know that stealing was the way to fulfill your needs. Whether that's right or wrong, whether that's good or bad, whether that's, yes or no, is aside the point, completely besides the point. Because to that person, it is right. And that's where we also find a really interesting line that it's very easy for us to say, like, well, that person's wrong because they do that thing, right? Let's say stealing, right? If there's two things I want to say about that. Number one is that if you grew up in exactly the same circumstances that person grew up, okay, meaning your consciousness inhabited their body throughout their whole life, well, then in this moment, you would be doing the same thing that they are. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that stealing's okay. Okay? That's why we have laws to govern society, right? And stealing is something that is outside of those laws in most circumstances. Unless you're a white-collar criminal, then it gets a little fuzzy, I guess, right? But generally speaking, right, yes, we can all sit here and agree that stealing is wrong. It is not okay to steal. And what I'm talking about is a more emotional sensation, a more emotional view of the person who is stealing. Because it's very easy to say, instead of saying that the stealing that the person is doing is wrong, it's very easy for me to instead say the person doing the stealing is a bad person. And that's when we slip into a delusion that is quite dangerous, and quite not dangerous in the sense of, people, not like things exploding or something like that, but dangerous for our own well-being. Right? Because the minute we start seeing people as good people and bad people, we are lost in a world of delusion. And once we are lost in that world of delusion, we are going to experience aversion towards those people who are in the bad column. And we are going to experience attachment and clinging to those people who are in the good column. But the reality is that good people are capable of doing bad things, and quote unquote bad people are capable of doing good things, right? And that's the point, is that there is no good or bad people. There are people who have come to a place where they do things that are either, positive and helpful and accommodating, or they do things that are damaging and hurtful and illegal even. Okay, but the person themselves is neither good nor bad. They have been formed by their experiences to do this thing because they believe that doing this thing is the appropriate thing for them to do in this moment, in this circumstance, in order to get what they need. Basically, in order to survive. And we all make those decisions, right? The difference is that, most of us aren't making the decision in terms of crime and stuff like that, right? But we all make those kind of decisions, right? We all, switch lanes when we think we're going to get somewhere faster, right? We don't worry about who's behind us and stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of a silly example, I guess. But the point is that we're always making, decisions that are in our best interest. And we're not always thinking about what the ramifications of our decisions are on every single person around us. That's just not how we work. And that's okay too, right? Now, yes, there is a certain, sort of moral compass that most of us work with, and it's natural. And most of us are not, have no problem working with this moral compass or staying within the confines of this morality, right? Which is to say, as they say, the golden rule, right? Do unto others the way you would have them do unto you, right? That's the key for me. But again, when someone is in a survival mode, right? When somebody is starving, for instance, right? That moral code changes for that person. Those moral boundaries no longer apply. And again, that would apply to you and me just as much as it does to somebody who right now is hungry, who might steal a loaf of bread or might break into a car to get something they can sell. And yes, of course, we can look at people who are, mired in drug addiction. Right. And again, now this is a perfect example. It's very easy to say, well, the person who's the addict is to blame for what they're doing. Right. They made the decisions to do the drugs. Right. But in the moment that they decided to do the drugs, that was what they felt they needed to do in order to survive. Gabor Mate says that is a brilliant mechanism for people who turn to addiction to survive a deep and excruciating pain. And once somebody is addicted to drugs, now they're making decisions based on their addiction, based on feeding that addiction, because to not have the substance they need to feed that addiction causes them to suffer. Because again, we're always making decisions in our best interest, which is really just decisions that move us away from suffering and towards well-being and happiness. That's what we're doing all the time. And yes, it's nice to be able to think of the ramifications of those around us, right? Nice to think of that. I don't start a fire in my home because I'm cold, because it'll burn the whole house down, right? But yet at the same time, when we see people doing things and we see people taking action or saying things and we feel hurt by it, or we are physically damaged by it, right? That is an opportunity for us to then look at that person or that group or that, system with a level of empathy and even some kindness and compassion that can come from that empathy. Remember, there's 5 types of empathy, right? So the first type of empathy is the empathic resonance. That's what most people refer to when they say empathy, is that I can feel your emotions somehow in my body, right? But the empathy that I'm talking about here is the empathy of perspective taking, right? Or even cognitive empathy. Can I come up with the thought process that gets that person to this conclusion? Can I put myself in their shoes and think through this? If I were them, what would I do in this situation? Then the fourth and fifth types of empathy, of course, are empathic concern, which is just a synonym for compassion, and empathic joy, which is, Buddhism has a correlate to that called sympathetic joy, right? Which is where we feel the joy of another, right? And so, yes, we always want to be practicing that level of empathy. We always want to be practicing that level of kindness and compassion and taking the other's perspective, whether we are, being harmed by someone or when we're taking actions ourselves. Because who knows who's going to react to what you're saying? Who knows how people are going to view and experience your words, your actions? And so, yes, it helps to take a moment and sort of open ourselves to, wait a second, if I do this thing, if I take this radio out of this person's car, what does that person feel like, Of course. But again, just because you feel that way about something does not mean that the car thief feels that way too. And that doesn't make the car thief wrong and you right, and doesn't make you right and the car thief wrong either. And that's where empathy comes in on the other way, right? Empathy, can I see it from the car thief's perspective? What if I were hungry? What if I were addicted to some, substance that would literally make me sick without it? What if I had a child at home who's verging on hunger and starvation? Can any one of us who live a comfortable lifestyle say that we wouldn't steal from someone if it meant feeding our children, if that was the only way we could feed our children or ourselves? Can any one of us sit and say that is not what we would do? It's easy to say, no, I would never do that, but you don't know that until you're in that situation. Now, again, I'm talking about some real big sort of duality stuff of good and bad and thieves and victims and stuff like that. But this also comes in, in moments at work, right? Like where somebody, didn't fill the paper when they ran out in the copier and you got to walk all the way over there and do it yourself, right? It's easy to say, that person's such a jerk. I can't believe they did that. And they're to blame for my bad mood right now. Okay? But, well, if you were in their situation, you'd have no idea what's going on when they decided not to change the paper. And maybe it was just something that was ignorance on their part. And again, it's easy. It's very intuitive for us to say, well, yeah, you see, the ignorance is what's to blame. I knew it's their fault. But that ignorance that you're perceiving is based on your understanding. You're not in their mind to understand it from their point of view. Maybe there's something going on in that person's life that's really preoccupying their mind. Maybe there's a developmental thing that happened with them that they just can't remember. Maybe they don't understand, even though you've told them 100 times. I always love the quote, if you've told a child 1,000 times and they still don't listen, the child is not the one with the learning disability, right? And so this is encapsulated in that as well, right? The idea is that people are always doing things, again, from their own consciousness, from their own, situation, from their own position in life, and they're doing things that are, first and foremost, beneficial to them, just like you do, just like I do, just like everyone does. And then the thing is that when we get into, well, as I say here a lot in this podcast, right? That which we do all the day, all the time, is a version of practice, right? So not aversion to practice, which I encounter a lot with my clients, but a version of practice, a type of practice, right? And that's really hard to recognize. But every time you try to find someone to blame for something, and again, past that tipping point of taking an open and honest and sort of accepting view of an accounting of what happened here, right? But I'm talking about getting into that idea of how can I find someone to blame for my, ill feelings right now, right? And not that you're going through that conscious thought process, but that's what we're really doing, right? And every time we do that, we teach our brain and our mind to do that again and again and again and again. And then it becomes such a mental habit for us that we're doing it all the time. And that's what we're talking about here, right? And that's the part that is the BS. Because the more time I spend trying to blame someone or just operating in that space of blame, I am missing out on this beautiful understanding of life, of the inner nobility of that other person. And it is that ability to see and to recognize and to remember that inner nobility that allows me to be well. It allows me to practice kindness. It allows me to stay centered and integrated, because blame is really just a form of aversion or attachment or delusion. Like we talk about here, right? We have delusion, attachment, and aversion are negative mental states. They are, the Buddhists call them the three poisons, because they are toxic mental states. Because anytime we are in a mental state of delusion, which is just seeing things incompletely or inaccurately, right? Like the person who stole the radio out of my car had some other choice, right? That's a delusion. Aversion being the resistance to the actual experience, the reality of the experience. And attachment or clinging being the inability to see anything else as a potential, right? And anytime we're in any combination of these three, we are always going to experience negative emotions. We are going to experience tension in our body, and we're going to experience negative thoughts, which is to say our thoughts are going to be catastrophizing. Our thoughts are going to be pessimistic. Our thoughts are going to be self-critical or critical of others. It's a toxicity. And in order to heal this toxicity, in order to the antidotes to this toxicity are the positive mental states. And the positive mental states are non-judging awareness. Can I really hold, which includes empathy, right? Can I hold the person who dared to use the last of the almond milk in the company refrigerator, right? Can I hold them in a sense of non-judging awareness? Can I not think of them as bad, but instead recognize their actions and try to see it from their point of view? And if I can do that, I move into a positive mental state. And once I move into that positive mental state, and the other two, the opposites of the aversion, the opposite of the negative mental state, the toxic mental state of aversion, is the positive mental state of acceptance. Like, this is what it is. The almond milk is gone. There's nothing I can do about it except to go out and get more almond milk, right? The only thing I can do about my car that's been broken into is to get the window fixed and get a new radio, report it in my insurance or whatever. And then once I think this way, again, getting right back to what we were talking about before, when I start thinking about it this way, I can now start to make different decisions. I can see it clearly enough that I recognize that, you know what? You can't park your car in this neighborhood on the street because there's too many people who are in too great of a need that they're likely to break into it. Or just leave it empty, completely empty, and leave the windows open so that there's nothing to break. Anyway, getting back to the opposite of the attachment or clinging is letting go. Just let it go. Just release it and let it be what it is. So again, now this really ties into compassion here, right? Because When we experience a moment of difficulty or a moment of suffering, right, whether it's our own suffering or the suffering of someone else, right, this blame is where we usually go. Or let me say it more specifically, we tend to go in one of two directions. Either we go towards blame, who can I blame for this situation, including myself, right? Or we go to a rush to a rush to exit the situation. How can I fix it? What's the fastest thing I can do right now to remedy the situation? But the truth is that the remedy is just an imagination. The blame is BS, as we've discussed already here today. And so the only thing that is real in a moment of suffering, and this is a really important sentence I'm about to speak, so please pay attention. The only thing that is truly real in a moment of suffering is the suffering itself. And what I mean by that is how the suffering manifests. How does it manifest in my body? What are the emotions it is causing? And the fact that it is going to create negative thoughts. I'm not going to be able to see a positive potential in this moment of suffering. It's not because a positive potential doesn't exist. It's because I cannot see it in my suffering, in my moment of survival mode. So therefore, the best thing we can do is to attend to the suffering. So when somebody, takes the last of the almond milk, or somebody breaks into my car, or somebody does something that hurts me or bothers me or puts me into a difficult position, the thing I can do is recognize the suffering that drove that decision. Even if the person doesn't realize they're in a moment of suffering, which often they don't. And this is true for ourselves too, right? Again, when I used to use a really simple mental experiment or thought experiment with clients and stuff. That imagine you're walking through a shopping mall, right? And there's not too many people around, and somebody's walking towards you. They're just about to pass you, and it's just nobody else except the two of you around for whatever reason. And just when you're about to pass each other, the person falls. They slip on some, frozen yogurt on the floor, and they fall flat on their face, and their stuff goes flying. Maybe they even get a bloody nose, right? If we see that, we stop everything. We bend down. I mean, most people stop everything. We bend down. We might even put a hand on their shoulder and say, "Are you okay? Is there anything you need help? Can I help you in some way?" Right? We don't stand over them saying, "Gosh, you are so stupid. What's wrong with you? How did your stupidity is to blame for why you're sitting here. You know that, right? And I'm just here to tell you about it," right? We also don't rush up to them and say, "Oh, get up. Come on. Come on, get up. You're fine. Get out of here. Come on." We don't do those things. What we do is we attend to the suffering. But yet when it happens to us, when we're lying there on the floor, it's like, no, I'm okay. Don't everybody look at me. I got to get out of here. I got to rush out of here, right? Or, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did this. I'm so embarrassed. How am I even alive right now? I'm so stupid, right? But all that does is keeps us locked in a moment of suffering. The thing that we need to do is attend to our suffering in the same way we would attend to somebody else's suffering. And doing so, by the way, in a physiological sense, in a neuroanatomical sense, drives the energy of our brain from that survival low area of our brain into the prefrontal cortex, which is where we figure stuff out, which is where we don't need to blame someone, and we don't need to rush out of anything. This is where we are truly empowered to see things clearly and to make decisions that can positively benefit us in the future or even right now. So, in conclusion, I hope you can recognize how blame is BS. And really the point here, and really the concluding thought here, is that the idea here of mindfulness, right, is the awareness, right? So it's about noticing that you're blaming. When you notice that you're trying to blame someone for something, which is different from taking a non-judging look at how we got to this point. But when we're saying like that person, oh man, I can't believe they did this, right? That is a clear sign that we are in a state of negative, one of those three negative mental states, or some combination of those three negative mental states. And the best thing we can do is to employ compassion and empathy and non-judging awareness to the situation, because that moves us from that real alarmist and survival part of our brain and into the part of the brain where we can actually truly figure things out and do something positive. And positive, I don't mean just like give somebody a flower just because they hurt me, but I'm talking about constructive, something that's going to actually change a pattern. It's going to break a cycle. If you want to know any more about this, you know how to find me, art@artburnscoaching.com. I will be happy to get an email from you at any time. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed today's very impromptu episode. I know I did, and I feel better. And I'm going to go back to my Iran-Contra video and get ready for my hockey game in about an hour and a half. All right, everybody. Have a great day. See you soon.